for that warm welcome and introduction, and what a view. And can I also say, what a great day to be a female in insurance. Thank you, Sam, for that intro. It set us up well. So I'd like to introduce our panel today. The first person I'd like to invite to the stage is Kathryn Wood. So Kathryn Wood is the CEO, co-founder and board member of handdii, technology connecting insurance companies with their customers directly to local contractors to fast-track the property claims process. Their clients include 4 prominent Australian and 7 US insurers, including 2 top 10 with a national contractor network in Australia and coverage across 14 states in the US. Prior to handdii, Kathryn led the motor and property claims division for QBE Australia, with accountability for over 250,000 customer claims, 1.5 billion indemnity spend, and over 600 FTE across Australia and the Philippines. Other previous roles include customer experience, claims transformation, workforce optimisation, contact centre leadership in the insurance and services industries. And the next person I'd like to introduce is, I'll give Kathryn a round of applause. I'm just mindful we've got such a short time and so much to talk about. The next person I'd like to invite to the stage is James Cameron. James is a partner at AirTree Ventures, focusing on early stage and growth stage investments in Australia and New Zealand, with a particular interest in software and fintech. James has led AirTree's investments in a Cloud Guru, Drone Deploy, Athena, Prosper, Secure Code Warrior, and dGraph. Before joining AirTree, James spent 15 years working overseas. He was vice president at Accel Partners, the VC fund behind Slack, Dropbox, Facebook, and Spotify. James co-founded a SaaS investment research software platform, BipSync, where he still serves as an advisor. So thank you, James. And finally, I'd like to welcome Brad Chalder to the stage. With more than 25 years' experience in the insurance industry, Brad is a leader in operational areas and identifying new business trends and opportunities. Managing RAC Insurance business model innovation since 2019, Brad is responsible for leading a team to conduct research, build new business models, partner invest in startups. During this time, Brad has built a broad international network and provides advice and assistance to startups from around the world. Prior to his current role, Brad managed numerous insurance operational departments at RAC, Amy, Shannon's and Suncorp. This experience has been invaluable when exploring disruptive vectors and identifying partnerships and investment opportunities. So thank you. So thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to be moderating this panel, and I know there's a lot of questions out there, and I hope we capture them here today. So, Brad, I want to lead with you. What impact has the global macroeconomic environment had on the appetite for Insurtech investment from your perspective?
Start with the easy question. There's certainly a lot of capital out there that is waiting to be deployed. I think it's fair to say that people are being conservative at the moment with deploying that capital. For an Insurtech industry specifically, I'd say that depends on what stage you're at. So if you're at an angel to seed stage, I think there's a lot of availability of capital, and if you've demonstrated some traction in early customer problem solving and achieving the desired goals, there's capital out there for you. If you're at the seed, if you're at the A or later rounds, it's probably a bit more difficult. Valuations have probably come off a little bit, and the metrics expected now will be different to what they were a couple of years ago. Probably it's returned to some sort of normality rather than some of the crazy numbers that were being thrown around 2 or 3 years ago. I think for Insurtech as well, depending on the area of Insurtech you're focused on, so if you're a B2B or enterprise sales type business, there's still plenty of availability. I think if you're more of a direct lines P&C Insurtech, it might be a bit more complicated. Unfortunately, when you go overseas, especially to the US, Insurtech in that space has probably got a basket of 7 they compare you to, and the performance hasn't been what would have been expected, I guess.
And what about from you guys? Kathryn, what's your feeling?
It's actually quite funny. We were on our way to doing a round just before everything kind of went south. And we actually retracted from that round and ended up doing a bridge just for the pure sake that the valuations also started to go really crazy, which wasn't great for the organisation that we had. And what we're hearing from our current investors is that yes, there is money out there, but people are being super, super conservative about where they're putting that money and not making the types of bets that they were making. And I'd agree with you, Brad. I think from Series A through to Series B is really, really challenging on the valuation front at the moment. Everyone's turned from looking at growth to looking at, well, can you actually become profitable?
I think, it can be rough out there, there's no question. And just to put it in perspective, November 2021 was sort of the month where it all went to shit, and Brad and I both had a full head of hair back then, and that's how it's been a rough for everyone out there. I think but just to put it in perspective a little bit, when you look at the numbers, and you look at the numbers both, you can cut it pretty much any way you want. You can cut it global VC funding, you can cut it Australian VC funding, you can cut it Australian Insurtech funding. This definitely come down heavily from 2021, the heydays of 2021. But if you actually look at the long-term trends, it's more than likely that and even in the 22 numbers, you can see this playing out. The 21 was a massive outlier in terms of the deployment of capital and the pace at which that was deployed across global VC markets, Insurtech included. And 2022 was a bit of a coming down to earth, but still across all three of those ways that you can cut the market was higher than 2020. So there's a sort of it's probably a return to a global long-term, much more linear growth rate. But relative to what it was like before, it's come down heavily, which probably feels more intrusive to people who are out there funding in both landscapes. And I agree that the cost of capital has gone up such that the capital efficiency of businesses is absolutely the number one correlated metric with funding rounds that we're seeing in Insurtech and otherwise. So valuations and the likelihood of closing rounds is largely around growth overall and capital efficiency of that growth, which was less of a hot button topic for at least global investors, but I think puts Australian, and we'll come to this in a bit, puts Australian companies by and large in a pretty interesting spot, because for the most part, Australian businesses, Insurtech or otherwise, have been much more capital efficient than peers overseas, almost forcibly so, because we've got a lot less capital in the Australian market. And so we've always had a DNA of doing more with less, which has become much more attractive to both local and global investors as the cost of capital has increased significantly.
Can I just add something there as well? I think the trend is your friend. I think look at what we've gone through in Australia insurance industry in the last 2 years with events and claims. Claims management is cool again. And around the world, people love claims management right now and looking at claims management startups to invest in. That wasn't the case if I go back 4 or 5 years ago. It was all growth and distribution. The trend is your friend there. So just keep an eye on where the market's going, where the interest is, because that's where people are looking to deploy.
And James, I probably just want to touch on a little bit more of what you've just spoken about. From an AirTree perspective, what are the themes that you look for in insurance, and what do you look for, particularly in terms of the Insurtech opportunities?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I'm going to ask Brad to answer this after me, because Brad's the specialist. I'm a generalist software-based insurer, so VC. So I have an investment in a couple of Insurtechs, one of which is public, open, embedded insurance player, and another which we've done recently, haven't announced yet, but it's a seed stage investment. And so we come at this from very much a software angle. It's what we know, it's what we love. We are students of the insurance business models and the games behind them, so certainly no expert, but have sort of fallen into the learning curve when it comes to building insurance businesses. And I think from that perspective, we will always bias towards some sort of software-based technology advantage. And so we've always been a little reticent to dive into businesses which are bringing a new sort of digital front-end customer experience platform that doesn't have any core differentiation at the back. And I think one of the beautiful things we've seen with Australian Insurtechs generally is that they've had to innovate not just at the consumer front-end level. They've had to go further down the stack. And I think one of the things and the trends that we're most excited about is seeing more and more Insurtechs build their way further and further into the guts and the business and the complexity of insurance in a way that I think the first wave of big Insurtech IPOs in the US probably didn't have to, or certainly didn't when they all went public. And so we're still amazed at just how much of the guts of insurance is still running off the back of mainframes in data centers owned by insurance companies, and how much innovation there is to bring forward that. And we're seeing the same trends and the same overall themes that we've seen in fintech over the last 5 years, where the first wave of innovation really came around through neobanks and retail-focused consumer front ends. So many of the founders that went through that process of building those businesses, successful or not, realized just how hard it was to build the guts of a bank. We're seeing the same thing with insurance, and Open's a great example. Open started selling insurance to the direct to consumer and realized that they had to build so much of the back-end platform behind it that they're now able to sell that as an embedded platform to brands in a way that takes out so much of the cost base of their own businesses. And I think that's one of the key trends that I think will continue for our investment profile, at least.
Brad.
We love picks and shovels businesses as well. I mean, if they're available and can get into the guts of the industry, there's no better place to be to help change enterprises anyway. We're looking for great founding teams like any other venture capital fund in many ways. We're looking for ideas that are innovating or creating innovation in the industry and can help provide strategic advantage potentially to either be us as an incumbent at RAC or in the marketplace. One of the things I look out for, or the team looks out for, is how can we help that founding team achieve its goals. We're looking at angel to seed. We do Series A investments, but very much angel to seed. We think that's where we add the most value in helping that business come to life using our team's experience. And so we're very much hopeful that we find teams that want to work with us. We can help work with them to achieve their goals and scale, whether it be in Australia or overseas.
Now, Kath, I'm going to come to you to start off on this one. Does overseas success generate enhanced credibility for local opportunities? And what works well overseas, and how does this translate to the Australian markets? Because I know you've got first-hand experience in this.
That's actually a very good question. So we originally launched here in Australia. We did our MVP with an insurance company here in Australia, but we actually launched in the US before we launched in Australia. I think it's called stupidity. It's actually just called saying yes to stuff. And then what was really interesting about the US was we almost had to relearn insurance, relearn the repair process for properties, and relearn finance. So that certainly taught us how to pivot, but it also taught us how to scale successfully, because we moved from, I think we started in Texas, then we launched in California. We're now in 20 states, which is really awesome, and we want to be national over in the US by the end of this year. That's our goal. What was then interesting was, as we started to gain traction in the States, insurance companies back here started to get interested in us and started to go, oh, hang on, are we actually missing out on something? And we're like, no, we're still selling to you, I promise. And, you know, we've got a couple of really great clients here in Australia who we're doing really fun stuff with. But I do think that being able to launch overseas and demonstrate success overseas is very attractive for Australians, both from a VC perspective, fund perspective, and otherwise. So,
and I guess adaptability. It plays into that resilience and that ability to pivot the business model as well. Yeah. What about from your perspectives?
I think VCs get a bad rap for pushing companies to move quickly internationally from day one and always thinking about themselves as a non-Australian business. I think in most cases, well, across the board on enterprise software, frankly, but in particularly around Insurtech, I think it often pays to go slow before you go really fast, internationally, I mean. And I think if you look at most of the breakout Australian companies in the space, people who have had success overseas, yourselves, Cover Geniuses, the Open of the world, there's been a long period and a sort of a slow capital raise story behind these businesses as they really sort of perfect their craft here in Australia before they take it to the globe. And I think that is telling in the sense of the style of businesses that have become successful out of Australia are often those picks and shovel businesses that are unable to do that, because you don't have the pressure breathing down your neck at acquiring the next customer, at marginal poor gross margins, and that pressure to scale into your venture funding. So that can be, don't get me wrong, more venture funding for Insurtech businesses in Australia would be a wonderful, wonderful thing, and I think there's a massive shortage of it. But I think it has also forced a lot of businesses to think outside the box a little bit about how they're going to fund their growth. And I think as a result, the ones that do break through are stronger businesses. Now, there's a lot of businesses that don't get that opportunity because of the lack of fundraising available in Australia, and it's a bugbear of mine that it is still very difficult to raise money for an Insurtech business in Australia. I don't think there's a huge pool of money out there, and I'm very, very interested in ways that we can increase that overall. But the ones that do tend to be ones that are able to build a really solid business and hit an inflection point. We've seen that with some of the businesses that have broken out of Australia so far.
And I think execution is hard, no matter where you do it. So I think whether you're executing overseas or in Australia, by demonstrating you can execute your idea and your business anywhere around the world, that gives us confidence. Confidence to both invest, confidence as a strategic to work with you in our business. I think that opens up opportunities to work with other insurance companies, because success breeds success. I think it's credit to you guys what you've done. You guys have done amazing of the United States. Like, I met you in the States before I met you in Australia, which is crazy. But yeah, I think any execution is good execution. I think it's the hardest bit. Everyone's got ideas, very hard to deliver.
And what's been your experience in the difference between raising in the US and raising in Australia? Are there some common themes, or is there,
listen, that's really interesting. I guess I've grown and learnt a lot more about capital raising over the last 4 years than I would have known previously. So, when you first start, you're at that angel pre-seed round here in Australia, and you're really green. You've got no idea what you're pitching. You don't actually realise that there's a formula to the pitch deck. You don't understand that there's metrics you're meant to talk about. So you kind of learn that lesson, and then you move through, that round into the next round. Our company is actually now an American company, so we've done the flip up. But that's only because we believe that, as we raise more capital, that capital will actually come from an overseas source. It won't necessarily come from here in Australia. Not to say that we wouldn't welcome it. But what I will say is I think the American VC community is much tighter. There's a lot more referral points, and and once again, this is my learning, is if you can get to the thesis of the VC firm very, very quickly, you can understand whether it's a yes or a no. And you don't know that when you're starting out. You don't understand to go, hey, AirTree, what's your thesis? No, we're not a good fit, whereas in America, they're really good at saying, well, this is actually our thesis, so you're either in or out. But I do know someone who might be interested because, and you should go and talk to. And then there's a warm referral, and that warm referral then leads to other warm referrals. Doesn't mean that you still don't have to have 100 conversations.
I think it's interesting in the US. It's so much more mature, the path from a startup through to funding, through to scaling. From the university through to your early angel investment, through to then getting introduced to broader venture capital funds and companies to work with and partners. That maturity, that path there is well trodden. It's been done 1,000,000 times. We're still developing that in Australia, certainly in the Insurtech industry. I think that's still developing, and we need to continue to foster that, because that's what brings more businesses to the marketplace. It creates better services for our consumers, and also helps serve us as an industry, because we can't do it all internally. We need startups to help us deliver the services. So I think as we mature that path, we'll start to see far more startups come into the Insurtech space. But we need to get there. We need to work at the university level and continue to work up from there. And accelerator programs and the like help that.
Yeah, just on that, I think the other thing I've liked seeing in the Australian market is the ability for the large incumbent players to work with startups. That surprised me a little bit. I see a similar thing with the banks actually, relative to where I used to work as a VC in Europe. A lot of the banks and incumbents are much more focused around partnerships with smaller startups. And that may surprise you, because I know there'll be lots of people in this room that probably feel like they're banging their heads up against the wall. But in many respects, it's a lot easier doing it here than it is in Europe. And I've seen that work very well, because especially when you're working in this area of picks and shovels and infrastructure and embedded insurance in particular, it's not just about building a nice cloud-based API and hoping for the best. You have to put serious legwork into building the partnerships and the relationships with the brands, with the insurers, with the carriers that you're working with. And I've seen this firsthand. Open, I think, has done a particularly good job of building out that part of their business and being able to service and work with partners very, very closely to make sure that the products that they're bringing together to market together are much better for the fact that they've been able to understand the partner's needs and work with them well, and vice versa. And we've seen that with folk like Bupa and Telstra and others that have done a really pretty good job of dealing with early stage startups.
Great. So here's a question for everyone. I might lead with you, Brad. What are your objectives for the year ahead? What are the things what are things looking like, and perhaps some of the challenges and some of the obstacles you're hoping to overcome? The good, the bad, and the ugly.
I'm going to go a shameless plug. So my team's launched a new app today called RAC Go. So I'm going to go a shameless plug, because that's a big challenge for us. It's the first time we've developed that. So everyone get their cell phone out or their mobile phone out and go onto RAC Go, download the app. It's a driver safety app. The reason we've developed that is we're all about safe, sustainable and connected as our purpose, vision, mission. We're trying to help people be safe on the roads, full stop. And if we can help have people have fun do that, get their kids involved and reduce fatalities or serious injury on not just West Australian roads, but all roads, we'll do whatever we can to help that. So get your mobile phone and have a download. On top of that, I think the area I'm more than interested in, I'm spending a lot of time, is I think CDR, so the consumer data right. As that moves into the insurance industry, I do believe that it could be a very large disruptive vector. And I think if I'm a startup today, I'd be thinking about how I could utilise that capability and learn from what's occurred in banking, both in Australia and now in probably the UK is more mature, how I could utilise that capability over the next 2, 3, 4 years. And as a venture capital, we're looking at that going, right, where's the next opportunity there and how could we participate in that?
James?
I think, as I mentioned, we've just funded a brand new seed stage in Insurtech, so I'm looking forward to digging in and helping them really get the business off the ground. It's always a really exciting part of our job as VCs, that sort of 0 to 1 phase. But beyond that, I think we touched about the gap in funding for Insurtech in Australia. This is something that I'd love to see close. It closes in a sort of idiosyncratic way. There's no top-down way to force this on, but it's a slow and gradual process. And I think if I was sitting here 7 or 8 years ago talking at a specialist fintech conference, I would probably be saying the same thing. And fintech, I think, at its high watermark in 2021 was about $3.5 billion Aussie in funding for that 1 year. The same year, Insurtech was about 130 million or so. So it's almost 2 orders of magnitude smaller. And if you actually look through the numbers, that was really sort of, I think probably about 70-80% of that was a couple of deals. It was probably Cover Genius and Open, maybe 1 or 2 others. So it's a small number of investments overall. So I think that seeing that start to hit an inflection point, which I think is very capable of, would be a great thing to see this year and beyond.
I guess for any startup, it's to keep growing and to do it in a profitable manner. We're very lucky. We've got a really great funnel of new clients coming through in this year over in the States, and certainly here in Australia as well. And we're looking at how do we strengthen the contractor base that we've currently got, and just keep getting those claims to local contractors who can fix properties fast.
Great. And I've got one question that we haven't necessarily prepared for, but I think it's always good to ask, is what's one learning or takeaway that if you were sitting out there in the audience, you can impart some wisdom or something from your industry experience for founders? Sorry? Yes? Jump in, Brad.
You don't know what you don't know is probably the best advice I was ever given. And say yes more often than not. Generally, by going down that path, if you're confident in your idea and confident what you're trying to deliver, by having a crack, saying yes, and moving forward, you generally can't go wrong. I mean, if someone told me I'd be sitting here 5 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you, right? So you just say yes more often than not and have a crack, and you'll be okay. You'll be okay. And get people to help you. Like, feel free, give me a call anytime. I'll take your call, and I'm more than happy to give you access to the right people that can help you if I can't or my team can't. So yeah, there's always people out there to help, but please just have a go. Yeah.
James.
I'm going to riff off that for a second, but I think I've got another one as well. But I think the only thing I'd add to that is that I see a lot of Australian founders who are very focused on keeping their idea secret for a long, long time on the basis that someone's going to steal their idea and go and commercialise it before. I've never seen that happen. What I've seen more of is the opposite, is people who are very happy to talk about their idea till the cows come home, tend to attract people into their network to try and help them. So go out there, put yourself out into the world and tell everybody what you're doing. It holds you accountable, and frankly, it gets people engaged in helping you. But I think the only other thing I would add is startups are really bloody hard. There's no one way or about it. So look after yourselves on the journey. Keep your heads up. This is a particularly tough year, I think, in terms of the funding landscape, and you probably get hurt. You probably hear no more this year than you hear in most years in the startup landscape. But as a startup founder, you hear no all the time. There's just no way around it. And so being able to sort of dust yourself up and pick yourself up, you and your team, and sort of keep going again is a natural, it's a necessity to being a startup, and that requires a real sort of focus around your own mental health and your own well-being. And so I'd take that time, go and spend time with other founders, build yourself a board of people around you that's not necessarily for the board of your company, but just your personal board. People that have been through the journey before, people that you can talk to about the ups and the downs. I think it's nothing but a useful experience to go through.
Kath, I think you're having a sigh of, it is hard. What's your takeaway?
Don't do it. Never, ever start. Never start. No. I would absolutely concur. What I would say is take the time to research, take the time to understand the people that you're meeting, take the time to understand the pain points that they're experiencing, take the time to understand what they're looking for, be it your investors, be it your board members, be it your clients. Because if you don't take that time to have a real empathetic and true conversation with them, then you're not going to make the sale, you're not going to get the investment, and then you really will have a hard time.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Kath's right. Deeply understand the problem you're trying to solve. Like, don't be veneer there. Deeply know it. Make sure you can communicate it clearly to others, because if you can't do that, no one else is going to be able to do it for you. So I think as a founder, you must be able to do that. And your team must be on board with that as well. So it's really important.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you all for everything you've added. And I just must say it's been an absolute pleasure working with these guys. They really gave a lot of thought to what the audience was wanting to hear and what we wanted to talk about today. So thank you very much for that.
We head off. Are there any questions anyone would like to ask, or does everyone know everything about capital raising? Yep, question. Sorry, guys. It's worth asking.
I'm just John from InsurtechLIVE. I just want to understand your dry powder problem. So, we know it's going to be a hard year or two for startups, but I'm sure your funds have a finite timeline in terms of expectation of deployment of money. So is there a startup problem for you where you're going to have to find enough fundable startups in a specific time period, given a down market and hardening of criteria?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's a question on a lot of founders' lips at the moment, and the answer is our investors don't pay us to pick the top or the bottom of the market, or if they do, they've picked the wrong guys, because I have no fucking idea when the top or the bottom of the market's going to be. All they're paying us to do is to try and find founders that are working against trends in technology and markets that are going to provide value over a decade-long period. We have long-dated funds, and so if we do our jobs right in that respect, the value created by the startups that are building against these, or at least the ones that work, and venture, like everything, is a power law. You don't need every company to work, but the ones that do tend to work big. Those ones should be able to create value that will dwarf the short-term macroeconomics. That's the basics of how the venture model needs to work. We have always been of the belief that you should be taking your pacing of the deployment of your capital without any real regard to the valuations for what's happening in the public markets, which are relevant 8 to 10 years from now for those companies. And so our investment pacing around the seed stage investment, which is the vast majority of what we do, has been the same over the last 4 years. We do about 1 to 2 deals a month. We have done that for the last 4 years, and we'll continue to do that over the next 4 years. So I don't think that's a challenge. Where I think you do find a challenge is upstream from us, where you have growth stage investors who are putting $50 to $100 million into companies. We've seen that market effectively put the brakes on quite significantly. And those funds do have a lot of dry powder in them, but I've done it, I went over in May last year. You want a depressing holiday? Go and talk to a bunch of growth stage investors for a week in the US in May 2022. It was not a fun place to be, but it was incredible to watch these people who had raised funds, sort of $2-3 billion growth equity funds at the beginning of 2020 and deployed them over the next 2 years and had an average entry valuation of somewhere between 40 and 60 times revenue. And they were sitting on these funds which are largely underwater. And they still had the capacity to raise fund. In fact, many of them still had a lot of dry powder. But it's very difficult for them to sort of write to their LPs and ask for capital calls. The money's not sitting there in a bank account. They still have to ask their LPs for it and justify why they're still excited about the market. And that's a difficult and awkward conversation to have when your funds are sitting there so heavily underwater. So there's nuance to that dry powder. There is a shitload of dry powder out there, don't get me wrong. And I have every belief that it'll start to flow at that growth stage in the coming, I wouldn't probably say, I'm not particularly bullish on this year, but I think it certainly will start to flow as some of the macro trends start to bottom and pick up. But at the seed stage, it's largely business as usual.
From a strategic fund perspective, we're not under that pressure to deploy the capital at any given point in time. It's about finding the right opportunities, both for us to work with as great founding teams or with the strategic advantage in our business. So, yeah, we're not under that pressure.
Any other quick questions? Nope, we've got to go. That's all.
Hi, guys. Fabrizia from Covered. Thanks for a good conversation. We are opening our funding round now, so I'm so glad it's 2023. Sounds like it's going to be a great year. But the question really is, Kathryn talked a bit about referrals within the US market and how that's much easier within VC. What's a tip for a founder to unlock that between VCs in Australia, but also referrals from Australian VCs into international markets?
I think go and talk to some VCs. I think you're right in the sense that US VCs can be much more specialised in their approach by definition. If you're an Australian, New Zealand focused fund like we are, you've sort of chosen your specialty. If you then go and overlay, we're an Australian, New Zealand focused Insurtech VC, it becomes difficult. Unless you're a corporate VC, it's strategic. It's difficult to do that as an institutional investor. And so as a result, you tend to be more generalist in terms of the sector. You tend to be specialist in geography and stage. That's certainly the case with most of the big VCs in Australia. So it is easier to find a small number of very specific VCs in the US who only do Insurtech. It's a big enough market for that to happen. And most of those will be known well to most of the VCs and the corporate VCs and frankly the other founders. So you're going to talk to enough people who have been in those worlds for long enough and you'll get the referrals. It's one of the best things I can do to help my relationships with US VCs is send them great deals, either from our portfolio or other deals that we haven't done.
I will also suggest the Australian government is amazing. So we've got a great relationship with the Australian government and they've been very supportive of Handy. They do a whole heap of introductions in ways that you might not otherwise get.
You don't hear that too often. So with that, let's keep going. Thank you to our panel.